A billionaire marries a black bride without even looking at her face and regrets it the moment her veil lifts. Kellen Ward wasn't the kind of man who believed in love. He believed in leverage, in numbers that added up. Feelings were a weakness he had watched destroy better men. So when a massive land deal required him to get married, he treated it like paperwork. No dinner, no calls, no photo. He said yes to a stranger the same way he signed his name on any contract. Her name was Amara Ellis, a black woman from an old Southern family that had fallen hard. A woman with music in her hands, steel in her spine, and more heart than money. On paper, she was the easy choice. Quiet, low profile, convenient. Someone who would never touch his heart. He had no idea that one lift of lace would feel like a punch to the chest or that his perfectly controlled life was about to slip away. Stay until the end and subscribe if you love intense, twist-filled love stories like this. Before the day he married a stranger in white, Kellen's life ran in a straight, predictable line. Deals, deadlines, results, no veils, no feelings. From his corner office, Charlotte sat beneath him like a map he owned. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, but he barely glanced at it. His attention lived on numbers, contracts, and projections that always ended in his favor. Feelings had never built a skyscraper. Feelings had never closed a deal. Power did. Control did. Distance did. On his desk lay a folder his mother had left for him. Inside were the details of a $1 billion land deal with an old Southern family. The Andersons wanted stability. A married man, a respectable wife, a picture-perfect home. Evelyn Ward had already found a solution. Amara Ellis. Old South Carolina name. No scandals in recent years. Educated. Classically trained pianist. Low profile. "Will you meet her first?" his assistant had asked. Kellen had barely looked up. No need. If Mom cleared her, she's fine. He signed the last page like it was nothing more than another contract. His future arranged in ink, just like always. Hundreds of miles away, Amara Ellis was counting pills instead of piano measures. The Ellis House in coastal South Carolina had once hosted governors and judges. Now its paint peeled in long, tired strips and the porch sagged like it was exhaling after a long life. Inside, the only thing still sharp was the sound of Loretta Ellis's cough. Amara sat on the edge of her grandmother's bed sorting medications in a plastic tray. Her fingers were made for concert halls, not pill bottles. She had trained for years to play on big stages. Her professors had called her a rising star. Then the scandal hit. Her father vanished. The money went with him. Invitations stopped coming overnight. Hospital bills did not stop. Roof leaks did not stop. When her mother mentioned an arranged marriage to a wealthy man in Charlotte, Amara felt her stomach drop. It sounded cruel. It also sounded like the only way to keep Loretta alive. Before Amara ever saw his face, Kellen crossed paths with her music. A week before the wedding date, Evelyn had circled on the calendar Kellen flew to Memphis for a quick meeting. The deal wrapped faster than expected. A storm rolled in slower than the contracts had. Trapped at the Riverlight Hotel, he loosened his tie and headed for the lounge thinking only of a drink and clothes. Then he heard it. Piano. Not background noise, but a voice. Low, aching, threaded with something like grief and defiance at once. He followed the sound to a baby grand in the corner. A black woman sat at the keys, her face half in shadow, her eyes closed. Her fingers moved like she was praying with them. Kellen stopped walking. For once his mind went quiet. The song ended. Applause. Before he could step forward, she gathered her sheet music and slipped away, leaving him with a melody he could not shake. Kellen flew back to Charlotte the next morning and did what he always did with anything that stirred him. He buried it under work. He told himself the pianist was a moment, nothing more. A song in a bar on a rainy night. not worth remembering. But the melody followed him into boardrooms and through quiet elevator rides. It was still in his head the morning he put on his tuxedo and let his mother adjust his cufflinks like he was a boy again. St. Andrew's Chapel glowed with flowers and money. Old families filled the pews. The Andersons watched every move, measuring the ward name against their own. Evelyn moved through the crowd like a director on opening night, smiling, whispering, arranging. At the doors, Amara stood under layers of white tulle, her world reduced to a blur. She could not see his face, only his outline. He did not look back. He did not even try once. The ceremony moved forward like something pre-programmed. Stand, repeat, exchange, smile for the cameras. Kellen answered on cue. His voice sounded distant even to himself. He glanced at the Andersons, at his mother at the altar, not once at the woman beside him. When the minister finally said, "You may lift the veil," Kellen stepped closer out of habit, not curiosity. His hand found the edge of the tulle and raised it. The world narrowed. There she was, the pianist from Memphis, the woman whose music had crawled under his skin and refused to leave, the same eyes holding that same ache. His chest clenched. For a beat, he forgot the crowd, the cameras, the deal on the line. Amara saw his face change and felt heat rush to her cheeks. She misread the shock as disappointment, as disgust, as confirmation that he found his black bride lacking. She dropped her gaze, swallowing humiliation with her vows that bound them. By the time the reception began, the story of the mysterious black bride had already buzzed through the room. People stared openly, curiosity edged with judgment. Crystal chandeliers threw light across the ballroom as servers wove through with champagne. A string quartet played something elegant and forgettable. Evelyn tapped her glass. Speech, she mouthed at her son. Kellen rose, glass in hand. He looked at Amara only long enough to find his place beside her, not long enough to steady her heart. "Thank you all for coming," he began. His voice was smooth, empty. "As many of you know, marriage has always been a strategic part of the Ward legacy. This union is no different." The room shifted. A few laughs died in the air. "To my bride," he added, glancing at her without warmth, "may our arrangement be mutually beneficial." Amara held her posture, every word cutting. She thanked the guests with a steady voice, while her heart tore. Hours later, the car rolled to a stop at Blue Crest Lake, far from Charlotte's glitter. The Ward Lake House was glass stone and money-reflecting black water back at itself. Kellen carried Amara's suitcase inside and set it down without meeting her eyes. "Your room is upstairs," he said. "Mine is down the hall." "Separate rooms," she answered. The corner of her mouth lifted without humor. How romantic! "This isn't that kind of marriage," he replied. "No," she said quietly. "You made that clear in your speech tonight." She turned to go, but he caught her wrist. "Why were you playing piano in that Memphis hotel?" he asked. "Your family is comfortable, aren't they?" Amara faced him. "My family is broke. Mr. Ward has been for years. I play wherever someone will pay me." Silence stretched between them. Later, when the house finally went still, he followed the sound of her piano through the dark like a man chasing faint light. That first night at the lake, he watched from the shadows. Amara played for herself, not for him, her back straight, her face turned toward the keys. He stood in the doorway until the last note faded, then walked away before she could see him. Back in Charlotte, the distance between them did not shrink. It changed shape. Amara moved into the penthouse and chose the guest suite without being asked. During the day, she slipped out to explore the city, found a music center, and started volunteering there. Teaching children to find middle C felt more real than posing for pages. Kellen buried himself deeper in Ward business. Longer hours, colder meetings. He told himself it was better this way. Yet some nights when he came home late, he would pause outside the music room. Through the door, he heard her playing sad, hopeful, angry pieces. Each one pressed against a part of him he had spent years locking away. One afternoon, a month into the arrangement, Amara came home from the music center and found Evelyn Ward sitting in the penthouse living room as if it belonged to her alone. The woman did not bother to stand. She let her eyes travel over Amara's simple dress, her hair, her steady posture. So Evelyn said at last, "You're the new Mrs. Ward." Amara set down her bag. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn gestured to the sofa. "Sit." What followed did not sound like a welcome. It sounded like instructions. A Ward wife was to be seen, not heard. No opinions, no emotions. No playing piano at questionable places. Her job was to support the image host the dinner smile on cue and never forget that this marriage had a purpose bigger than her feelings. Amara listened spine. Tall fingers laced together so Evelyn would not see them shake. When the lecture ended, she said, "I understand, but I will not be invisible." Later that evening, Kellen came home to find his mother there. Evelyn sat with a glass of wine, looking settled into his life. Amara stood by the window, shoulders tight, her face carefully calm. "We were just talking about the future," Evelyn said. "The Andersons will expect an heir. You should start trying for a baby right away. The sooner you give this family a child, the safer the deal becomes." Color drained from Amara's face. She stared at the floor, unwilling to give Evelyn the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Kellen set down his keys. "No." His mother blinked. "Excuse me, no," he repeated. "Children were never part of this agreement. You don't get to decide that for us." "For us," Evelyn's voice sharpened. "She is here because I arranged it." Kellen moved closer to Amara, not touching her, but choosing her side. "She is my wife, and you will not talk about her like she is breeding stock." The fight did not end with that sentence. Evelyn left in a storm of perfume and sharp heels, promising to revisit the discussion later. The door clicked behind her, leaving a heavy quiet. For a long moment, neither Kellen nor Amara spoke. She wrapped her arms around herself like she was holding something broken in place. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "Yes," he answered. "I did." It was the first time she had ever heard him choose her over his mother. It scared her almost as much as it comforted her, because it didn't change the facts. This was still a marriage built on a contract, not a choice. 2 days later, while Kellen was at the office, Amara packed a single suitcase. She wrote one line on a sheet of paper and left it on the kitchen counter. "I need time." When he came home and found the note, something inside his chest actually hurt. Amara's bus pulled into the South Carolina town just before dusk. The Ellis house looked even more tired than when she had left it. Paint curling, steps sagging, a place that had carried too much history on its back. Loretta was propped up in bed, thinner than before, but her eyes were still sharp. "You're supposed to be on your honeymoon," her grandmother rasped. Amara tried to smile and failed. "This is where I needed to be." Loretta studied her face. The wedding ring, the hurt hiding beneath her composure. So, the Ward money didn't fix everything after all. Tears burned behind Amara's eyes. "Grandma, did you know them?" "Really know them?" Loretta reached for the nightstand and pulled out a faded leather journal. "This was your mother's," she said. "And this is what they never wanted you to see." Page after page told the same story. The Wards and the Ellises tangled for decades in love, betrayal, and ruin. In Charlotte, the note sat on the counter like a verdict. "I need time." Kellen read the 4 words over and over until the letters blurred. Time. From what? From him. From the life he had forced on her. He called her. No answer. He called again. Straight to voicemail. By midnight, frustration had burned down into something he did not recognize. Fear. He had his assistant pull the address from Amara's file. Before dawn, he was on the highway, rain slamming against the windshield as he drove south toward South Carolina. 4 hours later, his GPS announced the Ellis house. The place looked like it was barely holding itself up. The front door opened before he could knock. Loretta stood there in a faded robe, leaning on a cane, eyes sharp as glass. "You must be Kellen Ward," she said. "You look like the men who ruined this family." Then she pressed the journal into his hands. "Start reading." After an hour, at Loretta's kitchen table, the diary opened between them. Kellen knew 2 things for certain. The Wards and the Ellises had been bound together long before his marriage, and his family had done damage he could no longer ignore. "Where is she?" he asked. "Where she always goes when her heart is heavy," Loretta replied. "The music academy in town." The building smelled of polish and dust. Kellen followed the sound of piano down the hall until he reached a cracked practice room door. Amara sat at the bench playing something aching. Her shoulders shook, though her hands stayed steady. He waited until the last note faded. "I'm sorry," he said from the doorway. She stiffened. "For what exactly? For the speech? For the deal? For not seeing you?" he answered. "For letting my mother turn you into a prop." Her eyes met his, guarded but curious, as if she was seeing a man start to surface finally. She didn't forgive him. Not yet. When she finally stopped playing, she told him she was staying in South Carolina for now. He walked out of the academy with her music still in his ears and the weight of her distance on his shoulders. Back in Charlotte, the city moved on as if nothing in South Carolina had shifted. Ward headlines praised the Anderson deal. Photos from the wedding still circled society pages, every image cropping Amara into an accessory at Kellen's side. Vanessa Hale watched those photos with a tight smile. Once she had stood beside him in those same glossy spreads. Once everyone had assumed she would be the one to wear his ring. Now she sat across from Evelyn Ward in a private club, stirring her drink. "So, you want her gone," Vanessa said, "and you want him back under control." Evelyn's smile did not reach her eyes. "I want what is best for this family. The girl is a liability. The marriage has to look dirty, desperate, fraudulent." A week later, Vanessa stood in front of camera's mascara. Perfect voice trembling in all the right places, claiming Kellen's marriage was a scam and that his wife was the one running it. The press conference hit like a slap. Every news channel ran the same clip of Vanessa dabbing at eyes, describing herself as the discarded fiancé and hinting that Amara had trapped Kellen into a sham. Amara watched it from the Ellis living room, her stomach twisting. Beside her, Loretta muttered something sharp under her breath about blonde snakes and old money. Her phone rang. "Kellen. We're not letting her control the story," he said. "Come back to Charlotte. Stand with me." Hours later, they stepped out of the car in front of Ward headquarters, flashing cameras, shouted questions. Words like fraud scam, gold digger. Amara's instinct was to shrink back. Before she could, Kellen reached for her hand and laced their fingers together, firm and sure. He faced the microphones. "Yes, our marriage was arranged," he said clearly. "No, my wife did not manipulate me. I stand by her. Fully." The word wife hung in the air, heavier than headline. The show of unity shook the narrative, but it did not stop the storm. If anything, it made their enemies move faster. That night in Kellen's office high above, Charlotte papers covered his desk. The journal from Loretta, old Ward reports, board minutes his father had once signed. Amara sat across from him reading her mother's handwriting. "My parents warned me about Richard Ward," one entry said. "They said his family would swallow ours." Another entry mentioned Alexander by name. Deals that never made sense, money that went missing, threats whispered in hallways. "She wrote that he came to the house the night your grandfather died," Amara murmured. and that after she tried to speak up, someone warned her to stay quiet if she wanted her child safe. Kellen's jaw tightened. This was no longer about one cruel speech or one marriage. Alexander had been bleeding families for years, and his father had paid the price for trying to stop it. The next morning, they made it through 2 more entries before Amara's phone lit up with an unfamiliar number from South Carolina. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something in her chest made her answer. "Is this Amara Ellis?" a nurse asked. "You're listed as next of kin for Loretta Ellis. She's been brought to County General. Possible stroke." The words dropped like stones. By the time the call ended, Amara's hands were shaking hard. She could barely set the phone down. "I have to go," she whispered. "I'm coming with you," Kellen said. "You have meetings, the board, your mother." "I said I'm coming," he repeated. "They can wait." She can't. The drive to South Carolina blurred past. Hospital lights replaced highway lines. Machines beeped beside Loretta's still form. Amara stood at the foot of the bed, knuckles white around the rail. For once, there was nothing she could do. Kellen stayed beside her and did not leave. By nightfall, the doctor convinced Amara to rest. Loretta was stable, but fragile. The next hours would tell them more. "There's a motel 2 blocks away," the nurse said gently. "You can be back here in minutes if anything changes." Amara stared at her grandmother's face, then nodded. Her body felt hollowed out. At the motel, the room was small, the air conditioner loud. Kellen dropped his bag by the door and stepped back, giving her space. "If you want me to leave, I will," he said. She shook her head. "I don't want to be alone tonight. I can't." They ended up side by side on the bed on top of the covers dressed. Her head found his shoulder. His arm went around her like it had been waiting there for years. In the dark, she whispered, "Thank you for being here." He turned his head. Their kiss tasted like fear exhaustion and something that neither dared to name. By morning, the machines were quieter. Loretta's eyes were open when Amara stepped back into the room, rimmed with red but focused. "Look at you," Loretta whispered. "You didn't sleep at all." Amara forced a smile and took her hand. "You scared me." Loretta's fingers squeezed weakly, then searched along the blanket until they found a small, tarnished key. She pressed it into Amara's palm. "Piano bench," she said. "At home, you'll understand." Kellen stood in the doorway watching the exchange. He didn't ask questions. He just drove them back to the old Ellis house that afternoon. The living room felt like a museum of better days. Sunlight fell on the grand piano that had outlived every party the house ever hosted. Amara knelt by the worn bench. On the side, hidden in the carved wood, was a tiny lock. The key slid in and turned with a soft click. Inside lay a thin stack of bank statements and letters addressed to her. Amara unfolded the first letter with shaking hands. The handwriting was familiar in a way that hurt. "My sweet girl. If you're reading this, it means your grandmother trusted you with the truth." Line by line, Daniel Ellis told the story no one else had. He had not vanished because he was greedy. He had been pushed out framed and then offered a deal. Disappear, take the blame, or watch your wife and daughter be destroyed. The bank statements showed transfers that did not match the story the world believed. Money moving from shell accounts tied to ward business into Daniel's new life. Not stolen. Paid. The final letter was newer. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, sat in the return address. "I am alive. I have wanted to come home every day. Alexander Ward made sure I knew what would happen if I did." Amara's vision blurred. For years, she had hated a ghost. Now she knew her father had carried his own hell to protect her. She pressed the letters to her chest and finally let herself sob. By the time the sun went down, she and Kellen had already decided. They would take the letters, the bank records, and the truth back to Charlotte. Back in Charlotte, the penthouse no longer felt like neutral ground. It felt like a war room. Amara spread the bank statements and letters across the dining table. Kellen added Loretta's journal beside them. Dates, names, threats, money. The same patterns appeared over and over. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim flash drive. "I haven't been completely honest either," he said. "I've been tracking strange transfers inside Ward for years. My uncle called them consulting fees. They never felt right." On his laptop, spreadsheets and reports lit up. The same offshore accounts, the same shell companies. Meridian Holdings, Solace Investments, names that sounded harmless until you followed the money. "I thought it was just Alexander lining his own pockets," Kellen admitted. "I didn't know about your family, or mine." Amara looked at the screen, then at the papers from the piano bench. For the first time, the pieces fit. "This isn't just greed," she said quietly. "It's a pattern, and it's been hurting both our families for years." "There's one more person who needs to see this," Kellen said. They drove into the Asheville Mountains the next morning, the air turning cooler as the road climbed. Trees rose around them like quiet witnesses. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt track, small but solid. Smoke curled from the chimney. Kellen hesitated on the porch, then knocked. The door opened on a man with his same eyes, only older and tired. Howard Ward took them both in gaze, lingering on their joined hands, the folder in Amara's arms. "I figured this day was coming," he said. "Loretta called me 3 days ago, said the past was finally waking up." Inside the cabin was lined with books and file boxes. Howard listened as they laid out the journal, the letters, the bank records, and the flash drive evidence. When they finished, he leaned back and let out a long breath. "Alexander has been rotting this family from the inside for decades," he said. "It's time someone cut him out." They worked at the cabin table until late afternoon, sorting duplicates, making copies, building a timeline that stretched back farther than either of them had been alive. "This is enough to bury him," Howard said. "Maybe even your mother Kellen." She knew more than she ever admitted. Kellen's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. "Then she answers for it, too." Howard's phone buzzed on the counter. He checked the screen, and his expression darkened. "It's a notice from Ward headquarters," he said. "Alexander has called an emergency board meeting. Tomorrow morning. Official agenda questioning your mental fitness as CEO and presenting new evidence of embezzlement." "New evidence," Amara repeated. The words tasted bitter. "They're going to frame you," Howard said to his son. "The way they framed me. The way they framed Daniel Ellis." Silence settled over the room, heavy and clear. "Then we don't hide up here," Kellen said. "We go back. We walk into that boardroom with the truth and let it burn." They checked into a hotel near Ward headquarters instead of returning to the penthouse. Too many eyes watched that building now. In the quiet of the room, with the folder locked in the safe and the flash drive buried in Kellen's pocket, the adrenaline faded just enough for fear to creep in. "What if this doesn't work?" Amara asked. "What if they twist it again? What if you lose everything?" He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees. "If I lose a company built on lies, maybe that's not a loss." He looked up at her. "If I lose you, that's different." The admission hung there, fragile and raw. She moved closer, and their knees touching. "Then don't ask me to run," she said. "We finish this together." A knock shattered the moment. Sharp. Official. "Mr. Ward," a voice called. "Charlotte PD, open up." When he did, 2 officers stood there. "Kellen Ward, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud." The officers led him away in handcuffs, their voices reading his rights over the echo of Amara's pulse in her ears. She stood frozen in the hallway until Howard's hand closed around her arm. "Look at me," he said. "This is what they do when they're scared. It means we're close." Marcus Dillard met them at his office an hour later. The lawyer's tie was loosened, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. "You brought me fire," he said as they spread the documents across his desk. Loretta's diary, Daniel's letters, the bank statements, the flash drive with internal transfers and shell companies, Howard's own records from the years before Elaine pushed him out. Marcus scanned page after page, his frown deepening, then turning into something cold and satisfied. "We'll petition Judge Reynolds for an emergency review in the morning," he said. "If we time it right, we can hit the board meeting and the criminal case at once." Amara gripped the edge of the desk. "And Kellen, if this holds," Marcus replied. "He walks out to the front door while they're still denying what they did." The next morning, the Ward boardroom hummed with quiet tension. Executives lined the long table. Alexander sat at its head, Evelyn at his side, both dressed in calm they did not feel. Alexander tapped his pen. "Given my nephew's recent instability, we must consider new leadership." The doors opened. Howard Ward walked in with Amara Ellis at his side and Marcus behind them carrying a briefcase. Conversations died mid-sentence. "You wanted to talk about instability," Howard said. "Let's talk about theft instead." He laid copies of the records on the table. Decades of embezzlement. Shell companies. Payoffs. Threats. "You framed me. You framed Daniel Ellis, and now you're trying to do the same to my son." Evelyn's lips thinned. "None of this is admissible." The door opened again. Judge Reynolds entered with 2 officers and Kellen no longer in handcuffs. "The charges against Mr. Ward have been dismissed," the judge said. "However, there is sufficient evidence to arrest Alexander Ward and Evelyn Ward for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." This time, it was their wrists that took the cuffs. In the weeks that followed, the empire that had once seemed untouchable reshaped itself. Alexander's position vanished overnight. Evelyn's influence fell just as fast. Court dates replaced gala invitations. Their names left headlines and entered legal briefs. The board voted to keep Kellen as CEO, but under new terms: full transparency, independent audits, a different kind of Ward legacy. Howard accepted a role as advisor, not ruler. "You clean it up," he told his son. "I'll make sure they never bury you for doing it." In South Carolina, another reunion played out. Daniel Ellis stepped across the threshold of the old Ellis house, older and thinner, but real. Amara stood in front of him, letters in one hand, the other pressed over her mouth. He fell to his knees. "I am so sorry," he said. She pulled him up and held on. There would be anger later, questions. But in that moment, there was only the fact that her father was home. Loretta's color slowly returned. The piano in the Ellis house was tuned again. And in Charlotte, plans for a music foundation began to take shape with Amara at the center. 6 months later, the old music school in Charlotte looked nothing like the worn building Amara had first walked into. Fresh paint, new pianos. A plaque by the entrance, the Ellis Ward Conservatory, funded by the Ellis Ward Music Foundation. Families filled the seats for the reopening concert. Children in 2 big dress shoes fidgeted with programs. Loretta sat in the front row, a blanket over her lap, eyes bright. Daniel and Howard sat beside her unlikely allies, finally on the same side. Amara stepped onto the small stage not as someone's wife, not as a silent ornament, but as herself. "Music can do something power, and money never could," she said. "It can heal what they broke. It brought me back to my grandmother, to my father. It even brought me to a man I never planned to love." Kellen joined her, a small velvet box in his hand. "We started with a contract," he said softly, for her and for everyone listening. "I'd like to continue with a choice." He opened the box. "Amara Ellis Ward, will you marry me again for real this time?" Her answer was a tearful yes, and as their families rose to applaud, the narrator's voice settled gently over the moment. "Some love stories aren't arranged. They're chosen, rebuilt from broken pieces. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a little hope and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey of healing.